Well, yeah, that's right.
Okay, go ahead and take your seats. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 57 of the Jerome Rohwer Pilgrimage. I'm really happy to see everyone because it's been, we've been doing so much, having an incredible experience. It's been kind of exhausting, and I know conversations were flowing. There was a party, and I won't say the room number, I think it was 300. The party went on all night, as it has been, and I just heard about it, so I wasn't invited to but clearly people are connecting and learning and seeing old friends and family members, and it's just incredibly memorable. So I'm glad that it's flowing along like this. And here we are today with another great day of programming. Just a couple of quick notes, and I'll repeat it at the end. But we have Frank presenting today and having this conversation, and there'll be a chance for all of you to ask questions. After that, there'll be a signing where this book will be for sale, and I'm hoping every single person will buy a copy for themselves and family and friends. For signing, it'll be just in the back room where we have breakfast in that meeting room conference area. So that's where that will be happening. Then after that, Rob Busher is going to give a short presentation about his project, and I just want to make sure I get it right. It's the Japanese American Confinement Sites Consortium, and so there's a lot going on with that. So come back in after you buy your book from Frank and got it signed. And then there's a good long break for lunch, or a rest in the room, or just more conversation, and then we'll be heading over to the Butler Law Center for the thing that a lot of people really create memorable conversations, the intergenerational conversations. So we'll have more about that at the end. I'll make sure to repeat it. But I am absolutely, I have the privilege and the honor to introduce Frank Abe, and also be in conversation with him and invite your questions. Frank is somebody who's, if you become interested or want to learn more about the Japanese American incarceration experience, one of the first things you're going to stumble upon is something that Frank has been involved in, right? He has created an expansive body of work across mediums, and he's not just rediscovering things, he's making discoveries happen. He's networked in, so many of the people that he's writing about or that he's sharing something, he actually knows them. He has history with them. And I think that's such an important voice to have flowing through this work. It gives it a strong authenticity. And I think in the presentations yesterday, you see the learning process continues and things evolve, and how we perceive things changes with time. And so you need someone like Frank to be a way into that, and then to help guide you and introduce you to other people who are going to help continue that learning, that connection. It brings people together, and it helps us understand our history, and helps us how to take the next steps, right? The next thing that's going to happen, the next thing that's going to create more awareness. So we're going to be kind of the new thing that Frank has done, which I think is a culmination of a lot of this, is this anthology, the literature of the Japanese American incarceration. It's when I heard about this, again, just didn't actually know Frank yet, but when I heard about this, I was absolutely thrilled. Something that we'll be talking about is that this is canon, right? Some of the work that's in this book it's out there, but it's hard to find. Now it's canon. It's a Penguin Classic book. Someone like Frank had to be involved to make this happen. It's the person we wanted involved in this to put it together in the way that it was put together. And he has a co-editor, Floyd Chung, who is not here, but they were partners in this. And then there were, of course, were people all along the way. And then he also has a graphic novel, We Hereby Refuse, which came out about not too long ago. It's a relatively new project. It's just another way of sharing the stories that Frank is so good at putting out there in a way that we can take it in. A graphic novel, if you think about it, it's going to connect with the youth, especially. We need things like that to happen. So we'll be talking about that. And because it's the Jerome Rohwer Pilgrimage, he's going to be focusing on the stories of that, because that's why we're all here to sort of like really get the heart of the matter of the stories in this place as we visited just on Thursday. So with that, we're gonna take a seat, and just Frank is gonna tell a little bit more about himself. But let's give a round of applause for Frank. So I did give that sort of overview, but one of the things that is a major theme in your work is resistance. In fact, your website is resistors.com,
right,
where a lot of this information here encapsulating it, you're summarizing it, you're broadcasting it. But I thought you could share a little bit about yourself, your biography as it relates to the theme of resistance.
Part of the storytelling that you're praising so well is my background as a journalist. I've been a radio broadcaster in Seattle for many years. I've been in government communications. Ross and I share that experience as well. And I've also had a background in theater too, which comes into play in many ways, other projects.
Okay, so you're here today to talk about the new anthology.
Yes.
And it's a body of work. There's an incredible body of work out there, and you were able to distill it into this collection here. And I just would love for you to sort of share how that project came to be, how you pulled that off.
as with all my projects, it really was not something I sought out to do. The graphic novel was a commission from the Ringwood Museum of Seattle. They got a grant from the JAX program to create a series of graphic novels, one of which was about camp resistance. I suppose my background in camp resistance stems from my film in the year 2000 called Conscience and Constitution, where we recovered 25 years ago. You could not talk about the draft resistors, the opponents of registration in camp, without getting some pushback from the Japanese American, well, at the time, the elders, the Nisei. Now we're the elders. The son says the elders, but at the time, the old guard JCL was very opposed, had suppressed for decades talk about draft resistors or so-called no-nos. And about 25 years ago, Eric Muller and Nico Chizumori and I, all at the same time, came out with works that centered the story of resistance to incarceration, which was, I mean, incredibly, the year 2000, still a subject that was not part of the polite conversation in pilgrimages like this. At the time, the prevailing notion was either, she got denied, it can be helped, or the patriotic response of the celebrated, go for broke, was the other model, as we saw yesterday, so dramatically. But neither of those, for me personally, rang true. And so when Frank Chin introduced me to Dr. Frank Chin, introduced me to the Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee, 63 young men who refused to be drafted from the camps until the rights were first restored, and their families produced from camps. That's what registered to me. My father's at Heart Mountain, in fact, and that was the breakthrough for me for telling that story. And this anthology, however, is much broader. It is not per se resistance. It is the collective voice of everyone, the 125,000 people in camp who shared the same race as the wartime enemy. And through fiction and nonfiction, letters, essays, memoir, I think that you get a collective voice, a shared voice, and of those of the struggle to retain personal integrity in the face of persistent injustice, as you know, and increasing dehumanization through a series of government edicts. And so how the anthology is structured is chronologically, so that readers outside our community can get a feel for what many in this room went through, exclusion, detention, incarceration, loyalty questionnaire, draft. And then in 1944, the Denaturalization Act, the Denaturalization Act of 1944, which for the first time enabled U.S. citizens to renounce their citizenship during times of war. This was a method devised by the Attorney General, passed by Congress, to begin the process of the wish of many congressmen to deport the Issei and Issei, deport everyone wholesale to Japan. And as the book shows, as the anthology shows, and the graphic novel, I think, dramatizes, many people walked into the trap and renounced their citizenship, immediately regretted it, and spent 10 years with an attorney named Greg Collins to regain their citizenship. That's the arc of incarceration. So the anthology collects both the writings of the people in camp in response to a succession of edicts. And we also reprint all the government documents as well, the Executive Order, Exclusion Act, Exclusion Order, and the entire loyalty questionnaire, all 28 questions, which I'm surprised many readers find revelatory, that they only focus on question 27 and 28, the obligated questions. But the first 26 questions are also very invasive, and reading those in sequence is also an emotional experience for some readers. By reprinting the government documents in the book, you get a sense of the antagonist. Every good story needs a villain. And so these documents represent the government's actions against us collectively. And the writings in the collection reflect the response of Japanese America to a succession of government edicts, which have to be understood as one being piled upon the previous. So, the exposure questionnaire did not come in a vacuum. It comes on top of removal, forced removal, detention, the loss of your freedom, property, and education, of course, detention in fairgrounds and racetracks, and then permanent incarceration in deserts and swamps. And for that section, I called it this section, Deserts and Swamps. And I really wanted to come to this pilgrimage to experience firsthand the environment here of Arkansas, because I've been at Hard Mountain to Lake Manzanar several times, but I didn't have confidence writing the word swamps in the subtitle of the chapter. So I had to call my subject matter expert, Aaron Aoyama. I said, Aaron, was Arkansas, was Jerome really a swamp? He says, oh yeah, Frank, it's fine. You call it swamp, it's fine, you'll be safe. And going to the cemetery at Rohwer, really seeing puddles of water by the roadside, I can see, yes, this was a reclaimed swampland. So I'm really glad to be here. But the anthology captures all that through 68 selections, 18 of which are translated from Japanese. And the other part of the anthology is reclaiming, capturing works that have been overlooked on the shelf, buried in the archives, or languishing unread in the Japanese language for 80 years. And so we found many translations that have been the recent translations, and we commissioned 2 new translations from the literary magazine of the Tule Lake Segregation Center, a magazine called Tasaku, which I'll talk more about at the Tule Lake Pilgrimage. So there's a lot of new material in this book that's freshly collected through the lens of someone like myself who spent a lot of time, 40 years, kind of thinking about all of this and kind of processing it and kind of sequencing it in the right order.
That was one of the things that really struck me was when you're putting a book like this together, it's about choices and about discovery. So there's a lot of work that goes on, just on everything from think about the cover to the brevity of the introduction to the way you organize the content so that it's telling that story. And I think even just now, where you were sharing, some of the things that were in it, there was a lot. It was information overload, right? You're able to drop names. You're able to drop part of the historical record, where you were finding some of this material. And that's the nice thing about what Frank and Floyd have done in this anthology. It creates a roadmap for the entire experience. That was the first thing that came out of it. You kind of flip through the book. You're drawn to how they've laid it out, and they're telling a story just by the way it's organized.
It contextualizes Penguin Classics, as you know. This is a classic, the black and orange white cover, as you're all familiar with, as a series that has democratized quality literature by putting affordable paperbacks in the hands of people. And they also, Penguin Classics has a reputation for contextualizing important historical periods for a modern audience. And so what this does, I hope, and I haven't met any teachers here on this pilgrimage, but maybe online, that it's the kind of work that a teacher can use in class and just give it to students to hear. This is it, read this, you get the whole picture. And then a teacher can also supplement it with localized stories, journals, interviews, or favorite movies that they can teach this with. So it has that breadth.
It definitely does. I think and you mentioned it, but some of these works that you were pulling out of the archives, they were translated for the first time. There were discoveries that happened. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh boy, there's so many works. There were 2 short stories that are in here that really translated from Sasaki. And I'll just say they reveal the personal feelings of the people in camp. Emotional. I could read one, but there's no time for that. Yeah.
No, we gotta make people buy the book so that they did a good tease there. Because they stand out. Part of what you want to maybe read something that you've read before, But then when you come and you find new things, that's part of the whole experience. So you guys did that very well.
We really, as with an anthology like this, we could have done a greatest hits collection. The temptation is you go for the familiar, you go for my friend Jimmy Wakatsuki Houston or Julie Otsuka, Hisayo Onoda or Kokoyamuchi. Familiar names, collect them, footnotes, headnotes, done. But we really wanted to dig deep. I mean, 1975, 40 years ago, I was a young 25-year-old in San Francisco. I was buying these hardback books I couldn't afford. The Derelicts of Company K by Tom Shibutani. The Kikuchi Diaries had just come out from Chicago Press. And I was buying these books, and I just knew there was something in them that I need to understand. And so I'm just glad now that after all this, I've been lugging these books and files and papers that people have given me over the years, from house to house and city to city, just dragging them with me, and finally having had the chance now to slot individual stories and episodes into removal, detention, incarceration, multi-questionnaire draft, and then resettlement, redress, and the current moment. So the book does bring us up to the current moment, which is the first anthology to do that. We used to call this chapter at the end, never again, or, we must not repeat history. Our chapter is called Repeating History. Just repeating history, because as we know, we've seen this happen in the last 8 years. And there's a very strong forward to that effect in the book.
And I'll ask one more question, and then you can
yes,
do the presentation. But this has come up in our presentations yesterday, where the way in which we are taking in material, the way that we're interpreting things, the way language and how we even understand something evolves with time, just from coming to a pilgrimage and learning things, and just how the nature of time changes how we view things. That's something that can create friction in the way that people are talking about something. Some person has a viewpoint, another person has a different viewpoint about the same material. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on how you handle that evolving nature of this material. The material is what it is, but the interpretation of it evolves. That's something you had to contend with in this anthology.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Oh, just the way that you're having to take material that maybe was written many years ago, and it means what it means from that time, but our view on things has evolved. We've learned more things, so the material takes on a different meaning.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with how you present it. For example, you open the graphic novel with Shelley Orta's self-published novel, Upon Their Shoulders, about the experience of Issei in Japan, and from in Hawaii. It was a Hawaii plantation experience. And we could have, picked any part of that novel, but I really wanted to focus on her experience being in Hawaii. Her most powerful episode was a description of a character, Issei farmer, seeing the attack on Pearl Harbor, because that's where she was. And so, the selection's called Those Planes Outside Aren't Ours. And that's, he sees the planes, he thinks that they're Navy fighter pilots on maneuvers from AIA, from Pearl Harbor. And he realizes he's at zero, and he goes, oh my God, those planes aren't ours. But in context, it immediately establishes for the reader where his loyalties lie. He's not shouting bonsai. He's saying, oh my God, those fools, they're attacking us. And so right away, he's an American in Hawaii. So that was the context around it is so important. So anyway, I'm gonna, to tell the story of Jerome, I wanted to localize the two characters in anthology who were in Jerome, and this may be new information for many in the camp resistance here at Jerome. To do this, I have to jump between the anthology and drawings from a graphic novel from Music Press called Hereby Refuse, Japanese American Resistance to Wartime Incarceration. And both center two voices from Jerome as key players, as I say, in this arc of experience. Violet Coswood Cristoforo was a recognized Tonka poet from Fresno, and the mother of 3 young children, including a newborn. George Kuratome was just 28 He ran a grocery store in San Diego before he was moved to Santa Anita Assembly Center, where he meets his future wife, singer Tarada. And as you know, Jerome's incarcerations come from California, from Fresno, flowing maybe south of Sacramento, and various parts of Los Angeles. Coming from the dry heat of the temporary Fresno Assembly Center, Violet finds the Jerome Rohwer Location Center to be, in her words, a more permanent but equally dismal camp located in the slums of Arkansas and infested with chiggers, mosquitoes, and snakes. This is her barrack in Jerome. So, as I said, nearly 1 year after she and others have been removed from their homes without any just cause or due process, the government finally decides it's time to determine individual loyalties. As we saw yesterday, the 442 story that we told yesterday, but the Army, having effectively branded the Japanese in America as untrustworthy by virtue of locking them all up, now needs a reverse PR campaign to clear volunteers as eligible for service. And the job of the Rohwer Location Authority is to eventually relocate families into homes and jobs in the East and Midwest, and it too needs some way to clear them for resettlement. So together they come up with what for them is the perfect paper trail, the notorious loyalty oath, a questionnaire. The two agencies combine the questions into one form, but no one knows the consequences of a yes or no answer. So the last two questions. And at Jerome, 600 Kibe men in Block 42 refuse, they meet and they vow to refuse to register. It's not something that's talked about a lot. The division at Jerome is not one that they wanted. It's a division created by this government paperwork. And it's dramatized in this painting by Henry Sugimoto. You may have seen this title, Reverend Yamazaki was beaten at Camp Jerome. Father John Yamazaki was a Protestant minister from Los Angeles. At Issei, the only offense was to translate the loyalty questionnaire into Japanese for the benefit of Issei at the request of the Jerome camp administrators. And it's you see a very visceral thing. He's being kicked in the crotch there by someone in camp who has a very real resentment of anyone considered an emu, a dog, a collaborator, whether he's JCL or not. And Jeffrey, you did a recent blog post about Paul Yamazaki, the bookseller from City Lights in San Francisco, the new book out. This is the grandfather of Paul Yamazaki, the bookseller. Yes, Reverend John Yamazaki. So a group called the Committee of Six at Jerome leads the resistance to registration, leads the resistance to the administration of this loyalty questionnaire at Jerome. Among them is Shizuo Kai, a 30-year-old from Fresno who becomes a Buddhist priest in Jerome. As a group, they go to project director Paul Taylor and ask, are these trick questions? If I answer yes to 27, am I automatically enlisted in the Army? If I say, you know these questions. If I answer yes to 28, to forswear allegiance to the Emperor of Japan, am I admitting that I was loyal to Japan before? Am I creating evidence that can be used against me in some future later tribunal? The Reverend Kai speaks only Japanese, so he needs a translator. Thank you, Jeff. He's a translator, and George Kuratomi steps forward as translator for him and spokesman for the Committee of Six. Can you go back one? Backwards? Okay, but thank you, Jeff. George Kuratomi. And George Kuratomi becomes executive secretary of the Daijo Buddhist Church in Jerome, a congregation of 300 who desire expatriation to Japan. So whether their organizing played a role or not, Jerome has one of the lowest rates of yes answers to question 28, the highest rate of segregants to Lake, and the lowest rate of volunteers for the Army. And Violet and her family too also refused to answer the questionnaire. So go ahead, Jeff. So I mentioned the name of Tule Lake. After the perceived failure of the loyalty questionnaire, Congress pressures the WRA to segregate the no's and the yeses. Advance. And the WRA obliges by fortifying Tule Lake on the California-Oregon border as its segregation center. So Kuratomi, Kai, and Violet's family are among the 2,100 Jerome incarcerees in California who've been sent by train to Arkansas, who are now from the train from Jerome back to California. And that's the story behind the WRA's the photograph that Jeffrey showed us yesterday. This is the story behind the photograph Jeffrey showed of people waving goodbye to the people leaving Jerome for Tule Lake. Okay. So on their arrival at Tule Lake, segregants from Jerome are fingerprinted and photographed. Okay. And in our anthology, we have a selection from a novelist named Kazuo Kawai, who describes the feeling as like, this is like going to prison. Okay. The files of Kai, Kuratomi, and Violet's brother Tokyo Yamane land on the desk of the Tule Lake project director, who was warned to keep an eye on what he's told are the troublemakers from Jerome. George, but all that George Kuratomi and his fiancée Singer Terada see are continued indignities. The Tulians who left to be transferred to other camps had stripped all the barracks of all the good wood siding. And the old Tulians who remained held all the good jobs in camp. So George and Singer observed the bad conditions at Tule Lake and say, we thought Jerome was a hellhole. This place is worse. His daughter tells me that George Kuratomi was a community-minded person with a quiet authority, that when he spoke, people listened, which makes him a good negotiator and mediator. So when the death of a farm worker at Tule Lake from an overturned truck leads to a camp-wide labor strike, it's not surprising that George Kuratomi from Jerome is elected chair of the Separate Negotiating Committee, or Daihyo Shakai. Kuratomi is, these are drawings from the graphic novel that I'm talking you through to get to the stockade. Kuratomi is thrust to the forefront when the camp director brings in strike breakers. They see trucks taking the people's food to the strike breakers, and inmates rush in to stop them. Inmates clash with military police who arrest and savagely club several men, including Violet Cristoforo's brother, Tokyo, who was thrown into a newly created stockade at Tule Lake, which is a prison within a prison. The army declares martial law and orders the arrest of the negotiating committee. Kuratomi and 3 others go into hiding and remain hidden for a month, eluding a camp-wide dragnet event. But once the army retaliates against the camp residents, he and the other men agree to surrender. And they call a mass meeting so they can surrender with honor. And they're greeted with thunderous applause, and then summarily thrown into the stockade without charge or hearing. And George Kuratomi's words here bear repeating, without being sent into confinement for disturbing the peace of the center, whose very peace we were striving to maintain. Ironic, isn't it? And he surrenders knowing that his fiancée Singer is pregnant. So George Kuratomi appears in our anthology through a diary kept in the stockade by a judo master from Los Angeles named Tatsuo Inoue. And his daughter Kyoko Oda recently published his Tule Lake Stockade diary. And we quote from his entry for January 44 entitled Hunger Strike, in which George Kuratomi plays a part in leading the hunger strike in the Tule Lake Stockade. So this is a Jerome resident who is a key figure, a pivotal figure in the Tule Lake stockade crisis. In the Penguin anthology, we also reprint Violet's haiku and her narrative behind the way she had to work ceaselessly to get her brother, Tokyo, and the others out of the stockade. Activism that brings her to the attention of a sociologist from UC Berkeley who was working in camp, who characterizes Violet as Madame Shanghai Shek. Meanwhile, George and the others in the stockade resolved to go on a hunger strike, which we describe in the book, as their only recourse. And with rumors of several collapsing from hunger, petitions for their release gained 8,000 signatures, half of the people in camp signed this petition. And so Singer from Jerome, Violet from Jerome, and a dozen other wives and girlfriends tried to crash the stockade to march in and see their husbands and boyfriends, but they're turned away by buckets full of water thrown by the guards. While its efforts do get the ACLU involved, even Attorney Wayne Collins, threatening lawsuits and bad press on behalf of the stockade inmates. WRA Director Dylan Meyer caves in, orders the stockade torn down, and then released. And George finally gets to hold his daughter, Yuri, who by now is a few months, 2 months old. So when Chili Lake is closed at the end of the war, George and Singer leave with a baby on a train for Pennsylvania. They resettle in a rural town in North Pennsylvania called Cruiseport, and George finds a job managing a potato farm in Advance. He later becomes a sales manager for a radio station that broadcasts to local farmers in Advance. Violet and her husband expatriate to occupy Japan, where she accuses that Berkeley sociologist of snitching on her to authorities, creating barriers to her travel that tear apart her family. That is a whole other story for another day. But Jerome was and will include the writing and anthology. So the point here is that by publishing these drawings and writings, we are now beginning to center the story of the Jerome resistors and Tuli Lake Vivenciates as key figures in the continuum of the camp experience. Before I take a seat, I want to mention Rohwer. Our collection includes 3 pieces from the Rohwer Connections, a poem by Janice Mikitani, who was a child of Jerome, part of a novel by Perry Miyake, who had a parent at Rohwer. I'm sorry, Janice Mikitani was a child at Rohwer, did I say that correctly? And also from the Rohwer newspaper, to open our section on resettlement after the camps, we found a really crazy piece, kind of Japanese American futurism advance. James Takeda was nicknamed Bean for being thin as a string bean. Maybe you saw his columns. He was the pipe-smoking co-editor of the Rohwer Outpost, for which he wrote a column called Once Overs advance. In May 1945, as Rohwer was being closed early, young people begin moving out, resettling the Eastern Midwest. Bean Takeda looks ahead 100 years and writes a piece called The Year is 2045, in which a boy and his father, dressed in loincloths, stumble upon the remains of the Rohwer barracks. And the father describes how they are descended from the people who refused to leave the center when it closed in 1945. And the son asked the father, who were these people? And the father said, oh, they were Japanese like us who refused to leave. It's a crazy story. I'm not going to repeat it for you. You have to read it to believe it. But it's in the anthology. The year is 2045. So with that, let me just return to our conversation with Jeffrey, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really wanted to localize the story for the publication.
No, you absolutely did that. And a lot of what you were sharing is from the graphic novel.
Yeah.
So we talked a lot. I was talking a lot about the anthology. Maybe share a little bit more context about Hereby Refuse. That's a court case driven, but the stories behind those court cases.
I already told the story of the Heartbound Conflict in my film. So for the graphic novel, I wanted to do the story of Jim Okutsu from Seattle, who was a draft resistor in Minidoka. I wanted to tell the story of Tuli Lake and the stockade, essentially the story of the stockade through the eyes of Hiroshi Kashiwagi, the playwright. And then to tell the story of Mitsuya Endo of Chicago, who was the 4th Supreme Court plaintiff, besides the more famous Kobayashi, Misumi, and Frank Abe, who all have children or family members who are doing films and creating foundations, giving them levels of freedom. But no one talks about Mitsuya Endo because her children don't talk about it. And Mitsuya was very reclusive, had a bad experience with the press apparently, and did not want to talk about her court case. And so our graphic novel is the first to go in and tell her personal journey, her personal story as a clerk typist for the state of California, being recruited by James Purcell, an attorney from San Francisco, for a test case to challenge the forced exclusion and the continued detention of an admittedly loyal U.S. citizen. And Mitsuya Endo's was a civil case as opposed to the other 3, which were criminal cases. they all violated the curfew or exclusion orders. And that its endos, the civil case was the only case to prevail at the Supreme Court and did in fact lead to the order to close the camps. So those are three stories. But I'm telling you all this background about Tule Lake and Jerome because in the anthology and the graphic novel, you have to go through all this work to set up the conditions under which people answered the questionnaire, the conditions under which people were segregated to Tule Lake, the conditions under which people decided to either renounce their citizenship and repatriate or expatriate. They, as the caption in your photograph famously said, what's the saying? The people whose loyalties were
More loyal to
Japan. Yeah, nonsense. Yeah. The people answered no to the questionnaire for a variety of reasons, but a primary one was anger and rage over everything that came before. Everything that they lost was taken away, and the loss of freedom. So the work here is to establish the context under which people made these decisions so that in our community, we can begin to, I hate this word, heal or confront the divisions that have continued to divide the Japanese American community for the last 80 years, even to this day. In JACL, they're still struggling with an apology for its actions to encourage segregation, which we include Mike Masa Oga's memorandum in the anthology. I thought that was very important. And its continued ostracism and demonization of the Jerome residents who at Tule Lake, who expatriated or repatriated or renounced citizenship. So that struggle continues to this day inside JCL. So the effort here was to use the graphic novel and the anthology. I'll tell you a secret. I should tell the online audience, but I mean, the subtext for the anthology is really to lay out all these steps, A, B, C, D, to ramp up to the most problematic part of the Japanese American experience, which is, of course, Tule Lake and the stockade to Tule Lake, and then the existence of prison gangs inside a prison. Whenever you have a prison, you're going to have the prison gangs. That's inevitable. But the government created a prison. So it's not something that they chose to do. You would not have had the Hoshidan marching through LA if they had not removed us to Fresno, to Jerome, to Tule Lake, and then the stockade. So the subtext of the anthology is to ramp up to the Hoshidan so that you understand with the selection from Tom Akashi called Betrayed Trust, a selection we call Badges of Honor, where he describes the bugling at Tule Lake and the Washoi military style calisthenics that woke people up at 5 a.m. At Tule Lake as simply expressions of people struggling to retain the last shred of human dignity that they had, that the government had left them at Tule Lake, where they felt abandoned by the U.S. government, being prepared for deportation by the government, and abandoned by the Japanese American mainstream community, who regarded them as disloyal, their loyalties to Japan, being called pro-Japan, basically, which in some cases may have been true, but in many other cases was not. The key quote from Tanakashi, which I used in the graphic novel, was, "For the first time, by bugling and doing prison calisthenics, for the first time, I felt good about being Japanese," which I thought was that was a light bulb moment for me. So that is the background for it.
Yeah, no, I mean, when Frank is speaking, you see the wealth of knowledge that's coming into all of this, and he's dropping names in case it can be overwhelming, and I think that's the amazing thing about the anthology and the work he does, because it distills it down, and it actually creates a pathway to figure out what it is you're seeking, what it is you might not even know, and it hits you. Just mentioned the light bulb, and then it takes you on a path. And I'll just a quick example, then I'm going to turn it over to questions to the audience. But Violet and Christopher, it's coming up. Some of you may know her book May Sky, which is a collection of poetry, and then there's haiku, but there's also like a historical account of how the haiku was in the culture. How they had clubs, there was a whole world built around it. And there's of course also haiku from the concentration camp experience. What's interesting is, I mentioned this to Frank, that I have that book, which is out of print, by the way, so I actually had to get that book. It's another valuable thing about this anthology. A lot of this work might be actually hard to find. Now it's not. And then that brings more awareness, and that makes it so that the work will be easier to find. But there's a whole other story to Violet that I didn't know, and it's a pathway for me to want to learn more. It's a much more complicated story. You were able to just share that with me as part of this book. It's part of the graphic novel.
I pulled this magazine off my bookshelf before I got here to give to Jeffrey, which is Rika, published in New York City by George Yuzawa in the 90s, and Frank Abe and Violet. I interviewed Violet Christopher in like 1988. And she was a tough cookie. She was a very strong woman, but with a haiku. I mean, she was a poet, and she had that refined sensibility of Japanese language as well.
Yes, and this is inspiring me to want to get that book back into print so that it's more available as it should be. But I think it's a living example of what this work can do, which is, Frank sent me a PDF of the article he wrote in 1988. But that just said so much to me. I mean, he was working on this before then, but also back then in 1988. And then the work continues.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm tired.
No. Actually, such an energizing presentation, but you've got a lot more work to do.
A lot more work to do.
Keep going. And I know you will. So I would love to turn it over. Did you have anything else you wanted to share? Okay, so let's turn it over to questions. We'll have the mic come around. Yeah, Ross.
Hi, Ross.
I was wondering if, through Den Show and other historic sites in San Francisco, we've been given ideas or formal training in some ways about looking up the archives. Are the questionnaires available? I'd like to know how my father obviously signed yes, who left the camps, but are the copies of those questionnaires available for us to retrieve?
Not searchable by online, but if you get your father's WRA file from the National Archives, have you requested his WRA file?
Well, I did look. I just want to.
No, what you have to do is request to the government. There's a form to fill out online to request your family's WRA file, which is still kept by the National Archives. And in there, I found my father's questionnaire, in which he had a no answer for any of the questions. But they're not available. They're not broken out. All Den Show did was scan the intake forms that give the dates of intake and outgo from the camps and the birthdays and so on. So there's the statistical data that Den Show has, but they don't have access to 125,000 individual files. That should be requested, but you can request it yourself, and you should. You all should.
Another question?
Hello, Frank.
Hello.
I love the presentation. I was very interested. It's very amazing. But I had a question. You brought up something about, you said something about your first time you were proud to be Japanese, or you were?
Tamakashi, a young teenager at Chudu Lake Segregation Center. His father was a leader in the Hoshidan and introduced him to the Hoshidan leader. Hoshidan being the return to the Japanese homeland, or some crazy Japanese name like that. By by joining the Hoshidan youth group, and they get at 5 a.m. and they would do calisthenics, and they would march around camp in formation, and they would go watch short, watch short, watch short, watch short, and then blow the bugle. They had these bugles they ordered from the Sears Roebuck catalog, the military style bugles. So they would blow, I think Japanese military martial arts themes on the bugles, and they had hachimaki headbands with the rising sun on it, and sweatshirts printed with the rising sun symbol, which they also ordered from Sears Roebuck, sixth grade. True story, true story. I got that from Tamakashi's memoirs called Betrayed Trust, a self-published book, 2004, Author House Press, that he self-published, and you can find it online, but it's not in bookstores. And I took his chapter called Badges of Honor. So the hachimaki, the marching, and the bugles he regarded as the Kibe leader of the Hoshidans. Here they bestowed these bugles on young Tamakashi. This is your bugle. Treat it as your badge of honor. And he did, because it gave him finally into the lake after removal, loss of freedom, loss of education, segregation, stockade, to the lake. It finally gave him a sense of belonging to something, because America was saying, you don't belong here. White America was saying, you don't belong here, you're not American, you are an alien. And the sense was they were being prepared for either a firing squad or deportation to Japan or some crazy future that they had no idea was going to happen after the war. So the effort in Tule Lake was to learn the Japanese language and culture, because one way or another, you're going to end up there. Because this country has shown you it doesn't want you here. It's a different experience from the other WRA camps, where people were volunteering for the service, relocating to Chicago, Cleveland to get jobs and go to college. There, people had more opportunities. But at Tule Lake Segregation Center, the experience was much, much different, because it was a prison camp for those who had been classified as disloyal, when in fact, disloyalty, as I try to explain in the graphic novel, is simply an administrative classification. Tamakashi had committed no overt acts against the US government. He had poisoned no water supply, sabotaged no defense plants. You couldn't do that in Tule Lake, removed from the West Coast. So there's simply an administrative classification. The government, having given you the questionnaires with a binary response, yes or no, when you answer no, you get sorted into a category. And again, no one knew that at the time they signed, they didn't know the consequences of a yes or no answer. The consequence was segregation to a prison camp. And once there, their horizons shrank into just one, which is Japan. And so Badges of Honor was Akashi's feeling of, finally, after all the humiliation, rejection, name calling, and injustice, I finally feel good about myself, I finally feel good about being Japanese, because I have this bugle, I have a sweatshirt, I'm marching with my friends, and we have a bond. And it's an emotional response they have, I think. So that's the context for the first time I feel good about being Japanese.
Nice, thank you. Can I just share something?
Yes.
Being born in Utah, in a Mormon country, I didn't move to California until I was 22 after college. So the Japanese community is very small. There is a Buddhist church, but going all the way through elementary, junior high, and high school, college, is always mostly Caucasian Mormons. They're very nice. I didn't feel at all any discrimination, but I always wanted to be blonde. I wanted to go to the church, the Mormon church, and I didn't really feel proud to be Japanese until I was in middle school, and one of my girlfriends said, "Oh, I wish," because there was like an example ratio in high school, 5 to 600 people, there are 8 Japanese in the whole school. So it's not like you're in California where you grow up and you've got a lot of friends. That
No,
look like
in
you.
California, I was a suburb of San Jose, I felt the same way.
So it was in middle school that someone told me, one of my girlfriends says, oh, I wish I was Japanese. And I was like, whoa, what? Just because you're so smart. All the Japanese seem to be so smart and make the honor roll.
Yes.
So that's the first time I felt
Good, about being
really
Japanese.
happy. But I have to say, I have to thank everyone here, because this is the first time I really am proud to learn about, you know, the Japanese, the Japan, my husband's born in camp, but I was not, so no one talked about camp. It was, if they said camp, they referred to it's almost like a summer camp, and, you know.
Same here.
It was, the stories, we didn't hear anything bad at all. So I didn't know anything until I moved to California, met my husband, so I just have to say, this has been a very awakening weekend. Thank you, everyone. Now I can I really feel, you know, part of this community, so thank you very much.
I did not sign the look deal.
You're too young.
I feel that you should drop the mic. I think we could. Thank you for sharing that. I think we do have. That was wonderful. So that's why we're here, right? So thank you for sharing that. And I think we're all feeling some form of that. And I think that's the goal of these pilgrimages. So, how many more questions we have? Okay. So we got 3 questions. Okay, I'll go back here first, and I'll come up, and then here. So 3 questions, and then we'll wrap.
Thank you so much for your anthology and your prior work on film and graphic novel and other projects. They meet a big need. I have a technical question. As an author, going through the increasingly overwhelming body of literature that we have for Japanese American writing and experience, for your anthology, how did you choose what to leave out? And how did you choose how to edit things down so that there was still a body of that piece of essence and not boiled down to a cliche, but that balance between critical substance and yet not overwhelming people and having to leave out some
Yes.
pieces. That's an interesting process. I can only think of it as excruciating, and I'm just wondering how you did that.
No, it was fun. It was fun in a way that if you go to my home, I have 2 huge bookshelves, and it's just filled with every possible book on campus experience I've collected over the last 40 years. And so I have this it's almost like a mental card catalog of all what's out there, you know, and then to seek out what I know we don't have yet. But you know, it was just fun to pick out the most important. I'm a former radio journalist, so I know how to pick out sound bites from an interview, along with I pick out the key emotional thing that person says about the fire they witnessed or the car accident or something. And you know, so pick out the most emotional parts of each piece, like Shelby Oto's "Those Planes Outside Our Yards." That was like the key moment for me. Toshio Mori has a novella called "The Brothers Murata" about 2 brothers, one who serves and one who resists the draft. And I could have easily selected the part about the brother who fought the draft, but actually I needed more pieces from volunteers. And there's a wonderful portion of that. She is my mother. Well, an Issei mother goes to the Topaz Mess Hall and defends her son to the other Issei parents who are condemning her son for volunteering for both service. And so the selection is called "She is My Mother and I'm the Son Who Volunteered." And that was a very nice piece to pick up. Badges of Honor is another one. So it was a question of just emotional high points from each of the selections, and then having a very rigorous timeline in which to fit slot all of these different moments, so that when you flip through the book, you feel like there's 68 different voices people with wildly different experiences, backgrounds, ages, generations, and yet there's a consistency of tone, which results in a collective voice that emerges, and it is the voice of a people who are all pushing back against a shared experience. Different backgrounds, different cities, professions, but we're all there because of our race. Okay? Because we're there for race, and so people are pushing back against being classified on the basis of their race.
Hello. Thank you for all the time and work you put into this. So this is my wife, Marcia, and her father fought in the 442nd, and we've been to Tule Lake, and we've never heard any bit about the whole no-no side of this that is the heart of all your research. And my question is there any like graphical representation of this so you can kind of get your head around the scope?
Yes.
And then kind of go in deeper in the areas that you're trying to learn more about?
Yes. Come see me in the bookstore, and I'll sell you the graphic novel, Hereby Refuse. Which graphically shows you the map of exclusion zones. And
Okay, great.
Yeah.
That answers my
Yeah, the graphic novel is about resistance to camp, but it's also a template of the entire camp experience. The two works are very similar in the way they're structured, in terms of a chronological sequence, and then all the different high points along the way. Yeah.
I like that question though, because that was
Yeah,
a good.
good setup. Thank you very much. Yeah, this is like a roadmap, like Jeff says. It's a roadmap.
So my question, first of all, thank you. It's been a privilege to listen to you this morning. And my question is regarding both of the books. So we have a 16-year-old grandson who was here this week, went out to Roar with us, was really kind of taken back by the whole experience. They had to leave this morning to head back home. But which book would you recommend for a 16-year-old? Would it be the graphic? Would it be the other one?
That's like choosing one of your children, which is like, I mean, for a 16-year-old, obviously, you get them all, but the graphic novel.
Well, I am going to get them all. He's also studying Japanese in high school, which we're thrilled about.
Oh, well then, the graphic novel, of course, is more accessible to ages 6 to 16,
Right.
But there is a lot of Japanese, there's some Japanese katakana and hiragana in our anthology that if they're studying Japanese, they can compare the two languages in the anthology.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So I'm going to buy 2 of those.
I think great graduation presents, by the
Actually,
way.
I'm going to buy 3. One for his Japanese teacher, his instructor at his high school. One for, I'll get both of them for him and one for us.
Yeah.
That is my mother, by the way. I did buy my own. I have it at home. I bought the anthology from a local bookstore in where we live. So, you have one last question? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Last question.
Thank you so much. It's so interesting, and I've learned so much. Just like Patsy mentioned too. My parents never spoke about it much, and so this is so eye-opening for me. And this is my first pilgrimage, so thank everybody because it's amazing. My dad's experience was a little bit different. His family was pulled out of Poston and was on the hostage exchange ship on the Gryphon. And is that in your book? Anything about that?
Our book does not cover Japanese Canadian incarceration, does not cover the hostage taking of Japanese in Latin America for a hostage exchange program. And I'm not sure if your grandfather was not from Latin America.
They took, Latin America, but also Japanese Americans from here as well, from camp here, as well as some people from Hawaii, and they did a hostage exchange.
Right, on the Gryphon.
On the Gryphon,
Yeah, no, we could not include that. No. I've not, because I've not seen any memoir or, short story or poetry from anyone who was on.
I have some, I'll mail them to
Oh,
you.
great. Oh,
I sent it to the Japanese American National Museum, I sent it to the Stanford Archives, I just, it's
Well, there
on
you
Dead
go.
Show too.
Volume 2.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
we're going for volume 2. The sequel.
Thank you.
Yeah, next book, yeah.
That was wonderful. I mean, we've got book selling going on here, more research happening, discovery. So, well, I think that's a wrap. Frank is going to be in so real quick, there's going to be a couple of announcements, so hold on one second. Frank will be in that back room behind the breakfast area, and the books are there. It's a local bookstore, Paper Hearts. Judy, who's on the planning committee, helped arrange that, so we're supporting a local business as well.
Thank you, Jim.
And let's just give a huge round of applause to Frank.